How's it going, guys? I'm here inside of Ventoy right now because I'm going to be installing Gentoo to hardware, except this time I'm going to be doing a really traditional Gentoo install. So I'm not going to install it from inside of Linux Mint or anything like that. I'm going to use the AMD 64 minimal install disk that comes with Gentoo. And this part you guys don't have to do, but I'm going to try to make this look a little bit bigger and nicer. So go in the shell, and then I'll do video info to get my resolutions. And it looks like I can do 1920 by 1080. So set GFX mode equals 1920 by 1080. Terminal output GFX term. Okay, so that made it a whole lot bigger, and normal to go back, and this is kind of lagging a bit. Hopefully this lag doesn't carry over into the actual install medium. So video should look better, and now I'm gonna get a bunch of penguins. Look at all those penguins! So in case you didn't know, basically each of those tuxes that appears at the top of your screen represents one of your CPU threads. So if you're on an 8-thread system, you'll have 8 tuxes. Except I'm using a Threadripper with 64 threads, so even now it's not displaying all of them, but this is the best I can do. And we'll try to keep them alive for a little while. Okay, so first thing to do once you're inside your install medium is to make sure that your internet's working. So we will ping gnu.org, and look at that. I'm able to receive responses, so internet is working. And it's also a good idea, especially if you've got multiple disks, to do an LSBLK so that you can figure out which disk is which. So in my case, I'm going to be installing to SDA, this 3.6 terabyte disk that doesn't have any partitions on it yet. Make sure you pick the right one, otherwise you're going to end up deleting some data. So I'll use fdisk, just like the handbook recommends. And I'm going to label it as GPT with G, and N to start creating a new partition. So you could just hit enter for the default number 1, enter for the first sector. Last sector, we're going to put at 256 megs. So this has created a new partition of type Linux file system, but this first one is going to be our EFI partition. I should probably also mention that you're going to do EFI if you're using UEFI, otherwise you're going to be doing MBR if you're using legacy boot. Just follow the Gentoo handbook if you're using MBR, or if you're not sure which one you have, to figure out which one you have. All right, so, got to change this type to EFI. I'm pretty sure that it is 1, or I'll do T, and then I'll do 1. Yeah, so it changed it from Linux file system to EFI. Next, I'm going to make the swap partition. So again, we'll do N, and default is going to be 2. And we can use the default first sector. It'll automatically pick the right one for us. Now, the last sector, the size of our swap partition, this is going to vary from person to person. In fact, swap actually isn't even necessary. But the old school rule of thumb was to set the swap size to double whatever your RAM size is. But I've got 128 gigs of RAM, so that seems like it might be overkill. I'll just go ahead and set it to plus 8G to make it 8 gigs in size. And then we have to do the type, to and list, because I'm not sure which one the Linux swap is. Okay, it looks like it's number 19. Yep. Okay, so I'll do 18.
Why you so stupid?
Oh, wait, no, I meant to do 19. That's fine, we can fix it. Partition number 2. and 19. Okay, so now it is set to Linux swap. And finally, the root partition, easiest one. So we'll do n for the new partition. It's going to be 3. We'll use this first sector, and then we'll use this default last sector. So this is going to make the rest of the disk be root. And Linux file system is the type that we want. So that is all set. And then we're going to do W to write those changes. Well, you can also do P. You should probably actually do that before W, before you write it, to just look over everything and make sure it's correct. So you can see I've got the right size, right file system types. So yeah, we'll do W to change it. Now we're going to be formatting the disk. So this is another area where you can deviate and use different file systems like XFS or BTRFS. But I'm going to keep it simple and use ext4 for the root partition and FAT32 for the EFI partition, just like in the handbook. mkfs.vfatf32 dev sda1 and mkfs.ext4 dev sda3. And if you're using swap, make sure you do mk swap dev sda2 and then swap on dev sda2. Next, we're going to mount our root partition on mnt Gentoo. So mount dev sda3 mnt Gentoo. Then we're going to cd to mnt Gentoo. And now we can choose our stage 3 tarball. Well, actually first, we should make sure that the date is correct. So type date and make sure that this isn't way off or anything like that. I know that mine is correct, but if yours is off, you're gonna have to set the correct date and time. Again, you can just follow the handbook to do that. So now we're going to download the stage 3. You could do wget, and that's probably what you would do if you're going to script your Gentoo install. But since I'm doing this manually, I'm going to download it with links, which is going to kill my penguin. So RIP, guys. So I'll do links, https www.gentoo.org. Downloads, mirrors. Bye-bye, penguins. Okay, so we're gonna go to downloads, and we're going to do this one here, stage 3 minimal, save, and just wait a couple seconds for that to download. All right, and then we can hit Q to get out of links and yes to exit. So now if I do an ls, actually I'll clear the screen now since the penguins are dead. If I do an ls, you can see that I've got this stage 3 AMD 64 blah blah blah, and now we're going to unpack it. But we have to do this with a very specific command. So tar xpvf stage 3 xattrs include equals colon star dot star numeric owner. And let me double check to make sure that I put that in right. All right, looks good. So you want to make sure that you do this exactly as the handbook says instead of just a regular tar xpvf, because those extra switches, the xattrs include and the numeric owner, they're going to preserve the extended attributes and the user IDs and group IDs of all of the files that are in this archive. Basically, if you don't do it that way, then your installation is not going to work. Okay, so now, if I clear my screen and do an ls, this looks a whole lot like a standard Linux root directory. except for this stage 3 archive, which is there, which you could delete if you want. But the reason it looks like this is because this here, these directories you're seeing, is actually Gentoo. Now, the next step that we're going to do is also very important. It is the difference between your Gentoo installation taking minutes or maybe an hour to do versus it taking many hours or days. And that is editing your make.conf before you start installing Gentoo. And I actually recommend just changing into the right directory now to make sure you get it right. So we're going to cd etc portage. Okay, and if I do an ls, you will see here is my make.conf. Okay, so you want to be very careful and not accidentally edit this one that's inside of /etc portage, because this make.conf here, this is for the Gentoo live installation CD. This one is the one for the Gentoo system. If you edit this, it's not going to change anything when you go to install Gentoo. Okay, so now I'm going to vi into make.conf. There's a few changes that I'm going to make here. So first thing I'm going to add to the beginning of common flags is, if I can do it right, -m arc equals native. So this is going to tell Gentoo to compile things for my particular CPU architecture. And then this is the big one. So just below F flags, well, it doesn't really matter exactly where you put these. Well, you got to make sure your marc equals native is within your common flags, but like this thing doesn't matter. Make ops equals double quote J, and then you want to, after the J, you want to put the number of CPU threads that you have in your system. So I've got 64. This is really important because it's going to, like when you actually start compiling things, your system is going to use whatever number of CPU threads you specify here. If you don't specify anything, it's just going to use one CPU thread. And that's going to result in very, very slow compilation times. Obviously, 64 is way better than 1. Or say if you have an 8-thread CPU, you can put 8. Another important thing to note about makeops is you also got to make sure you have the RAM. So it's recommended that you have 2 gigabytes of RAM for every 1 thread that you're going to dedicate to compiling so that GCC doesn't run out of memory. So in my system, 64 threads, 128 gigs of RAM. That's why I've got it set to J64. And then I'll set the use flags. And I actually don't recommend you guys do this part because I know the last time I did this, I had really crazy use flags and a lot of people are having trouble. But I'm not going to put anything too crazy in here. I'm just disabling Bluetooth, systemd, KDE, and GNOME, because I'm not going to use them. All right, so we've got that all set up. And let me just take one last look at it, make sure everything looks good. All right, so now I will right quit. Okay, so next we're going to choose a couple of good mirrors to download our source code from. That helps speed the process up a bit as well. So the command is going to be mirror select -i -o, and then point it to mnt gentoo etc portage make.conf. And okay, it looks like it's displaying correctly now. So we'll go into no, it looks like it's glitching out on my preview again. Okay, let's try this. For some reason, my capture card does not seem to like these ncurses menus. All right, so University of Waterloo. Come on, why do you keep messing up? Well, this part might just look a little bit messed up on video because during the live recording it's looking messed up, but I'm going to choose University of Waterloo, and I'm also going to choose some that are in New York because those are just physically closest to me. Where is it? Yeah, it's at the bottom. Okay, Rochester University. Okay. Hopefully that's not too bad when I go to edit this. Now we're going to create the directory for our repo. So I'll mkdir parents mnt Gentoo Etsy portage repos.conf. Then I'll cp mnt Gentoo usr share portage config repos.conf into that same directory, Etsy portage repos.conf, and then call it gentoo.conf. Next, we'll copy DNS info, so cp dereference Etsy resolve.conf to mnt Gentoo Etsy. And now we'll mount our file system. So mount types proc mnt Gentoo proc mount rbind sys mnt Gentoo sys. This is why, by the way, I recommend using, I actually do recommend using some kind of GUI live CD, because then you could just copy and paste this stuff from the handbook, and you don't have to manually type it out like I am. Mount rbind dev mnt Gentoo dev mount make rslave mnt Gentoo dev mount bind run mnt Gentoo run, and then mount make slave mnt Gentoo run. Now we can chroot into our system. Chroot mnt Gentoo bin bash, and then source Etsy profile. And they also recommend in the handbook that you change your bash prompt to say chroot, I guess just to keep you from getting confused, but it's not necessary. As long as you can remember that you're in a chroot environment, you're good to go. Now we're going to mount the boot partition. So mount dev sda1 to boot. Then we're going to do a WebRSync to get the latest snapshots. So emerge WebRSync. Okay, now we're going to select our profile. So eSelect profile list, and it's going to list out all the different profiles that you can select. So again, this is where a lot of people are probably going to branch off and maybe start doing different things, but I'm just going to keep it really simple and just use this default stable profile that it starts with. One thing to keep in mind as a general rule of thumb, the longer the profile name is, generally the longer it takes to install, because it has a whole lot of specific things. Like this one, for example, it's going to emerge GNOME and it's going to emerge systemd when you go to install the system. That's going to take a while. So I'm just going to keep things really basic for this setup. But if you do decide to change your profile to something else, you just have to do eSelect profile set and then enter whichever number in these square brackets here that corresponds to your profile. And now I'm going to update the world set. Anytime you emerge world, by the way, moving forward on a Gentoo system, it's usually going to take a while, depending on use flags and whatnot. But this is going to go ahead and compile and emerge all of our packages. So I will emerge verbose, update, deep, new use, at world. And then I'm gonna go do some cleaning in the other room while this runs. Actually, looks like it's only got 6. Huh. Maybe I'm not gonna have time for that.
Was fährt so spät auf hoher See? Das Kronjuwel der Bassarmee, die Bassmark und sein Kapitän, das weltweit größte Soundsystem. Auf diesem Schiff ist abgehend Pflicht, zu laute Musik gibt es nicht. Hier kommt der Sound, der Kiefer bricht wie ein Wolframklotz in dein Gesicht. Wir haben nicht den besten Ruf, dafür den besten Wodka. Oh, du hältst dich für ein Partytier, hier ist der ganze Partyzoo. Dauersaufen, Druckbetankung, Asi wie ein Fliesentisch. Der Wodka wird zu einem Gemisch, letaler als ein Kugelfisch. 1, 2, Feuer frei, Abos machen ohne Gnade. Wer vor dem Morgen schlapp macht, der fürs Panzerschokolade. 3, 4, hoch das Bier, keine falsche Müdigkeit. Jeder Einzelne an Bord ist Bassmark. Bassmark ist ein Starkoloss und ist auf hoher.
Okay, so that's done, and I don't even think it took 2 whole minutes, but then again, I was using a really, really simple Gentoo profile. If I picked one of the more complicated ones, or if you did, then you're probably waiting a whole lot longer. So now we're going to set the time zone. I know mine is East Coast, so if yours is also East Coast, you can just do echo America /new _ York to Etsy time zone. And then if you're not sure what it is, you could always ls usr share zone info. And like I could do that for America, and then let's see, yeah, New York is right there, but I just had that one memorized. Now we're going to reemerge the time zone data package. So we will emerge config syslibs time zone data. And now we have to do some text editing, but my TISM is too powerful to let me use Nano, so I'm going to emerge Vim. And wait for this to install, but you know what? With 64 threads, I bet you it's gonna be pretty quick.
Hoher See, der Boss auf uns ist jeder Schuss verschenkt, wenn der Schall dein Sonar zersprengt. Der Ton aus den Schiffskanonen kommt von Hamann und Kardon. Das Flakgeschütz gesponsert vom Bus macht aus einen Matrosen Matrosensoße. Allerdings muss das nicht sein, wir lassen uns auf Freundschaft ein. Kommt zu uns an Bord aufs Deck, wir saufen uns die Rübe weg. Nacht für Nacht, Tag für Tag, bleibt die Bassmark unbesiegt. Egal ob feindliche Gewässer, am Ende feiern alle mit. 1, 2, Feuer frei, Abos machen ohne Gnade. Wer vor dem Morgen schlapp macht, der fürs Panzerschokolade. 3, 4, hoch das Bier, keine falsche Müdigkeit. Jeder Einzelne an Bord ist allzeit kampf- und saufbereit. Bassmark.
Okay, that only took about another minute or 2. So now I'm going to edit my locale. So vim into Etsy locale.gen. And I'm going to uncomment these two, the 2 ENUSs. And then I'm going to right quit that. And then locale gen to regenerate that list. And then if I do deselect locale list, deselect locale, select locale list. There we go. I actually had the command written down wrong in my notes. So this will show you what the currently selected one is right here. So it's this CUTF-8, and I'm going to change it to ENUS. So I'll do eSelect locale set 4. And then if I run this again, bam, now it's changed to 4. And we also need to update, like to fully update our locale and reload our profile for it to take effect. We have to do the command env update and source etc profile. So that's going to regenerate that. Okay, now we're going to install some firmware for the kernel. So we will emerge sys kernel Linux firmware. And we'll also install sysapps PCI tills. Now hang on. Masked by Linux firmware, no source code, licenses, missing keyword. Okay, I think I know what's going on here. Missing a license. So if you get something like this, you can fix it with echo sys kernel Linux firmware. So the same name, it's up here. And we'll do @binary redistributable. TRUBUTABLE. And then /etc portage package dot license. Okay, so now that should work. And there we go. Yeah, so that was just a licensing issue that I had to fix there. It's generally recommended to install the Linux firmware. That's necessary for like graphics cards and things like that. So I don't know. I don't think it mentioned the binary redistributable part in the AMD 64 handbook. We'll just wait for it to finish. It's almost done. Okay, and now for the kernel itself, I'm actually going to skip the step of customizing my kernel, which I know some people are going to say is a sin when installing Gentoo, but the problem with doing a custom kernel is that it's very specific for your system. So there's no way for me to really cover customizing the kernel in a tutorial like this unless I go over all the different kernel settings, which would take hours because the Linux kernel is so big. So I'm going to install a generic kernel, and because I'm doing that, I might as well emerge the binary, because compiling a Linux kernel with all of its options enabled is going to take forever because the Linux kernel is super bloated. So we'll just do this, and this should be pretty fast because it's a binary. now we have to set up our FS tab, because it creates a file for you by default, but as you can see, it's all commented out, and everything here is not correct. So we have to change this to dev SDA1, dev SDA, this was 3. And then this one is dev SDA2. So you just have to remember which one was your swap, which one was your root, and then which one was your boot. And if you're unsure about this, you could always just do lsblk to check it. And everything's labeled right here. SDA1 is boot, SDA2 is swap, and SDA3 is root. And let's also go ahead and set our host name. So we'll edit, or no, we'll edit etc conf.d hostname. Change that from localhost to Gentoo box. This can be whatever you want, it's custom. Okay, now we're gonna want to install DHCP, so net will emerge netmisc, net MISC, DHCP CD, and net IFRC. And then enable it, RC update add DHCP CD default, and RC service DHCP CD start. And let's see, stars, okay, it's already running, so no problems there. And now we're going to edit our net file. Well, actually, first thing I should do is an Ifconfig to figure out what my interface name is. And you should do this too, because chances are it's not just gonna be ETH0. That would make our lives way too easy. So mine is this ENP72S0. Let me actually write that down. That's a little, that's a little bit special of a name. So it's ENP72S0. Can never just be ETH0. It's too easy. Okay, so we've got that written down or memorized, and we're going to edit etc conf.d net. Well, actually, we're going to be creating it. And we're going to put config ENP72S0 equals DHCP. Okay. And just check one last time to make sure I did that right. ENP72S0. Okay, cool. Finally, we're going to do some changes to make this work at boot. So we'll cd into etc init.d, and we will now link net.lo to net.enp72S0. And then RC update add net.enp72S0 to run level default. All right, so now that's gonna work when we boot. And again, make sure you just change that net dot to whatever the name of your Ethernet interface is. And I'm not going to cover Wi-Fi. That's in the handbook if you wanna do Wi-Fi in your system, but there's a desktop. So I'm not using Wi-Fi. And what's next? We can set our root password. We're almost done, by the way. as you can probably tell by me setting the password. And there's a bunch of stuff that I'm going to skip. I'm not going to do a system logger. I'm not going to install any file system tools. If you want those, just follow the handbook. But I will install Grub as the last thing. Now, since I'm using UEFI, I first have to add something to my make.conf. So at the bottom, you can see these Gentoo mirrors that got added by the mirror select command earlier. Okay, it looks like actually my system might be freaking out a little bit. Let me see. Maybe I'll just put this text on the screen in case it looks bad in editing, but what I'm typing here at the bottom is grub platforms in all caps equals double quote, and then take caps lock off, EFI -64. And maybe I'll put text on the screen in Kdenlive. I don't know why when I open up these different menus and like when I go into Vim, for some reason it makes my capture card freak out. Anyway, so that is saved, and now we can go ahead and emerge Grub. Now, it's very important that you do this setting that I just did here if you're using UEFI, because otherwise it's not going to boot. Okay, so make sure you have that EFI 64 in there. If you're doing MBR, then you don't got to worry about it. Emerge sys boot grub. And I'm coming to the end of this now, looking at my preview from OBS. It looks like, unedited, this video is only about 45 minutes. So it doesn't even take an hour to do a base Gentoo install, as long as you're smart. And there's still some things that I did slow here, like if I wasn't narrating and redoing things because my capture card is messing up, I could probably do this in half an hour, maybe even faster than that. Which, at that point, that's not really that much longer than a standard Linux install. I mean, hey, if you've got a beast of a CPU, like a Threadripper, or you've got a, what's the Intel ones called? Like a Xeon or anything like that, or even some of the newer gaming ones, you know, they've got a whole lot of cores now. That's typically what it wants for compiling faster. I don't think clock speed is as important as core count, at least not for compiling. But yeah, this myth that it takes days to install Gentoo, that only applies to people that are installing it on toasters or using a toaster because you can cross-compile, or people that didn't set their make.conf, which is their fault, not Gentoo's. Okay, so what do we just do? We emerge grub. Now we got to do grub install target equals x86 underscore 64 EFI directory equals boot. Let me make sure I've got that right before I hit enter. x86 underscore 64 EFI directory equals boot. Okay, looks good. And again, if you're MBR, then that's going to be different. Just follow the handbook. Grub mkconfig o boot grub.cfg. All right, and we're done. Well, actually, I'll do this just for the sake of completion. Install a very, very important app, NeoFetch. Most important app that we install on Gentoo. All right, and then I'm going to umount l mnt gentoo dev shm ets and umount r mnt gentoo, and now I'm going to reboot. Okay, so I'm going to go back into my BIOS and just make sure my boot order is correct. And hey, it actually did set it correctly. Cool. So we will discard changes and exit. So here we are inside of Gentoo. And let's make sure it all loads correctly. Let's hope my kernel doesn't panic. It oh, it looks like the video preview went out for a second, but that's fine. All right, so we will now log in. Bam! Working Gentoo Linux system. And oh man, isn't that beautiful? We've got the AMD Ryzen Threadripper 3970X along with that GPU. Looks beautiful. And then we're only using, wow, actually that is quite a bit. And oh yeah, that's because I changed the resolution of my TTY. That's why it's using so much memory. Kind of heavy, but it still looks pretty good. I'll probably change this around a little bit and try to get it running really, really lean. I have in the past managed to boot Gentoo with Xorg and DWM, and I had it running just under, I believe it was 60 megs or something like that. Now, that was with a really low resolution and stuff like that, but I think with the 1080p monitor, I have also managed to get it, single monitor, I have managed to get it under 100 megs. It starts going up a lot with Xorg when you have multiple monitors, which I do have here, by the way. I've got 3 monitors that are all 1920 by 1080 with a full HD TTY, so that's why it looks kind of bloated. But anyway, we're done, and real time on my OBS here, without, like, before I even do any edits, it's 49 minutes. Look at that. Doesn't even take an hour to install Gentoo. Get yourself a better CPU and make sure you set your make-ops. There's no reason not to use Gentoo, but okay, enough bragging. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Like and comment, hack the algorithm. Share it with somebody. Share it with somebody who failed to install Gentoo or somebody who said it takes too long to install. Prove them wrong. Follow me on Odyssey. Have a great rest of your day.